so excited to be here.
Me too, and I have a great new story to tell you guys today.
And you probably think it's about fairies.
But it's not.
Because princesses are smart too. So our story today is actually about a new standard.
But wait, Jasmine, we have to actually say about what the new standard even is, or what this book is even about. So in the beginning, we're talking about Disney, which is our home. Then we're going to go into licenses, and then a new standard, which is what the book's about, and then give a little example.
Okay, so Disney, a little bit more about our home, was founded in 1923 by Roy Disney and Walt Disney. Our current CEO is Robert Iger.
And then who is Disney? So a lot of people just know that there's Mickey Mouse and Minnie Mouse, but there's a lot of other things that they own as well. So for example, broadcasting and cables. ESPN is actually owned by Disney as well. Parks and resorts. We have almost 11 resorts and 4 cruise lines. And then Walt Disney Studios, which is our main focus today, which is the Disney Music Group and the Disney Theatrical Group. And then Disney's consumer products, such as the Disney Store. And then Disney Interactive, which is their online portal.
So we know Disney is a big company, but just to give you a little perspective, our revenues in 2014 were about $48 billion. And as you can see in this chart, revenue has continued to grow year after year.
But wait, Jasmine, what was it 2013?
You know, a big thing that happened in 2013 was Frozen came out. That reminds me, where's Elsa?
She's always late.
Let it go, let it go. And decided to show up. Want to take it from here then?
Oh yeah, sure. So a license is a permit from an authority to own or use something, do a particular thing, or carry on a trade. So for example, you need to have a license to drive your car, because you can't take your sled to work every day.
So, at Disney, we're all about the experience. Image is very, very important to Disney, and licensing is also an important part of our business, but we're very particular about who we license to. When we license out our products, we focus on 5 main brands. Disney Media, Classics and Entertainment, Pixar, Disney Princesses and Fairy Tales, and Marvel.
So for example, whenever you think of a movie, what are 3 things that you think of? The characters, the music soundtrack, and the storyline. Those are 3 examples of things that we license.
So as you can see, license, and from the first line of the statement here, says licensing and publishing, and that's almost 64% of the revenues for consumer products. It also, you can see that from 2012 through 2014 and continuing on, we're growing a lot through licensing.
So as Jasmine and Elsa both said, the licensing is so important to us. So along with licensing, you have to be able to recognize revenue too. So in order to recognize revenue, right now, the current GAAP standard divides it into film licenses and music licenses, because they're categories, so they separate it separately. Revenue is recorded when there's persuasive evidence of an arrangement, like a contract. Film is complete or available for delivery. The license period has begun. The fee is fixed or determinable. Collection is reasonably assured. And for other forms of licensing that are not films and or musics, they're just recognized like normal. And then music licenses are mainly similar, but they have a couple differences. Like there's a non-cancelable contract, there's a fixed fee, the music, right, and recording have been delivered, and then there's no remaining significant obligations to furnish additional music.
So the new standard actually completely gets rid of industry-specific revenue recognition. So here we consider other factors when deciding how to recognize revenue. The first thing we'll be looking at is if the license is distinct, and basically that means can the customer benefit from the license on its own or with other resources that are readily available to them. If a license is distinct, you can consider recognizing the revenue once you've transferred that one obligation. So you've delivered the music, for example, if you have a music license. If it's not distinct, you actually have to wait till you deliver the entire package. So if you license out 2 different things, but they go hand in hand, you cannot consider recognizing revenue until you've fulfilled your obligations on both licenses. The second thing we'll be looking at is, does the license provide a right over time or at a point in time? So the conditions that need to be met for it to qualify as a license that provides a right over time is a licensor undertakes activities that still affect the intellectual property that's being licensed out. The licensee is exposed to the effects of the activities of the licensor, positively or negatively, and also the licensor's activities do not actually transfer a good or service to the customer of the licensee. So if it provides, and if it doesn't meet those factors or conditions, then it will be a license that provides a right at a point in time. So for both of these, we actually recognize revenue after sales have occurred or the licensee has used the license, especially for royalties. And quick note, restrictions on time period or geography of where you can use the license is not applicable applicable when trying to figure out if it's a point in time or forward time.
Alright, so the biggest impact of the new GAAP standard for recognizing revenue is whether the revenue is going to be accelerated or deferred. The accelerated revenues mostly apply to software, and so they don't really apply to the Disney's revenue recognition for the licensing of the consumer products. However, it does apply, the deferred revenues do apply, because as Jasmine just mentioned, the revenues won't be recognized until the licensee can gain benefits from the license. Another advantage of this is that it aligns the revenue to when it is actually earned by the licensor. Another disadvantage of the new GAAP is that it's difficult to determine if there are distinct licenses, and that might use extra resources to figure that out.
So my favorite part, and part of it like an example, what's Disney on Ice?
We've actually all been on Disney on Ice.
Through Beauty and the Beast, Aladdin,
and, of course, Frozen. So Disney on Ice is a series of touring ice shows that go around the world to bring the movie to life through figure skaters, and that includes the storyline and the music. It used to be known as Walt Disney's World of Ice. And like I said, they go all around the world for almost 6 years, I think, and perform these shows.
So what better way to show Elsa than to actually this year for Disney on Ice?
In our 35-year history of Disney on Ice, we have been waiting for this film. The film Frozen is such a wonderful tale, and it makes for just the perfect ice show. Not just because it has to do with a wintry feeling and ice and snow, which obviously lends itself to the ice medium, but because the story has so much emotional resonance with families.
In this video, Frozen Disney on Ice uses Disney characters, it uses a Disney storyline, it uses Disney music, and it actually needs to license that content from Disney in order to use it. So the Disney theatrical production is the one that's part of Disney that is responsible for licensing out to live shows, and they're under the studio segment.
So the actual revenue of Frozen itself was almost $1.254 billion itself. And the royalty revenue on the licenses was $5.63 billion. They also licensed it through a Broadway musical recently, and that was $1.1 billion in revenue that they made. Now, Disney on Ice right now is still touring all the way around the world, so we don't have the actual revenue numbers, but they're raising to be just like this.
And as you can see from the numbers, they made enough money on licensed content, almost as much as the film itself. And royalty revenues really do add up and significantly contribute to the revenue of Disney overall.
So why does this new standard even affect Disney on Ice? So according to the old standard, like I said before, you separate it out to films and you separate it out to music. Now in Disney on Ice, obviously there's film and music because you're using the soundtrack, you're using the characters, the costumes, and things like that. So, but you'd only recognize revenue as simple like in a simple way with only when there's a contract with Feld Entertainment.
So with the new standard, first we would have to realize that this is not a distinct contract because in order for Frozen Disney on Ice to perform, they actually need the music content, the content to license the characters and the storyline. So they can't actually perform unless they have all of them, so it's a package that Disney needs to deliver. And also it's a license that transfers a right over time because Disney's activities still impact the licensee. So if Disney took a step that negatively impacted the image of Frozen, that would also impact Disney on Ice Frozen. In this case, we would recognize revenue either when the sales have occurred or after the show has actually taken place. And so in summary, in this specific case, revenue would actually be deferred, but it would actually more be aligned with when revenue is earned because it would be on royalty revenues.
So wasn't that a great story, guys?
Yeah, I really learned a lot.
But wait, do you have any questions?
I can attest to being a father of a 3-year-old daughter contributed to the top lines there of those financial statements quite a bit through Frozen on Ice and those things. But you know, get this, correct me if I'm wrong, I believe they deferred the new revenue recognition standard a year.
That's the for between 2020 or something like that.
Right. You know, impacts on, you know, Disney, very large organization that can certainly implement these changes probably fairly seamlessly. And just maybe your thoughts about how that could ripple down to much smaller enterprises, like you mentioned, software companies and things that are going to be heavily impacted by these new standards, but kind of maybe just your opinion on how that could change the landscape for some of these smaller companies.
Yeah, so I think like you said, for Disney, it's such a large company, so a lot of the cons of actually implementing the new standard, it's not really going to affect them that much. They can easily, you know, incur those expenses. But for a much smaller company, those expenses could actually like take away from their overall revenue. But I also think that like for royalty revenues, it is much better to recognize it when they're actually being earned instead of estimating it kind of into the future. And that gives an investor a better idea of when revenues are actually being earned, and you get a more complete picture.
Because like right now, they only recognize revenue when there's contracts. So if I come up to you and say, I want to buy this, and then you say, okay, I signed a contract, now here's your money. Now if the actual thing doesn't go through properly, if there's some technical difficulties, I already got paid, so I'm already going to walk out of this.
Right. So for a smaller company, there may be like some more expenses, but I think that for the investor and overall for the standard, especially for the conversions, it would be a step in the right direction.
I think with all these things getting so complicated, you get to the point you want to say, show me the cash.
Exactly, definitely.
If I have the cash, it's revenue.
Yeah.
Good job.